Disney did something to our society. They anamorphized animals into something they're not. With big bright eyes singing around a Disney princess, to a warthog and a meerkat singing to a lion cub about how his recently dead dad isn't that bad. Disney even has a crab singing about how good life is under the sea. Even Coca-Cola is no better, teaching an entire generation that the murder machine called a polar bear is nothing but a cute cuddly creature that just wants a hug. Well, what happens when a mad scientist gets funding from the government and watches The Jungle Book one too many times? Well, in the 1960s, that's exactly what happened, when experiments to teach dolphins to speak English quickly fell out of control, leading to an unprecedented story of drugs and dolphin doinking.
Yoo-hoo! I'll make you famous.
Every experiment gone wrong starts with a mad scientist, and for Peter the Dolphin, his deranged experimenter was John Lilly. For some of you Joe Rogan fans, you might find that name familiar, and if you do, it's because Lilly is known for being the creator of the sensory deprivation chamber. Still, he was known for being more than just the inventor of the isolation tank. He was a member among the counterculture thinkers of his time, known to associate with free thinkers like Timothy Leary, an early advocate of LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs, along with a fellow named Ram Dass, a self-proclaimed holistic healer and spiritual leader. And just like every other white dude trying to be a metaphysical god, aka cult leader, he gave himself a divine sacred name, Baba Ram Dass. He became known not for starting a compound in Guyana, but rather for popularizing yoga in the West. I tell you about these two men to give you an idea of who John Lilly surrounded himself with. To get a good look at the man, we have to start at the start of his journey. Being born January 6, 1915 in St. Paul, Minnesota, to parents Richard Lilly and mother Rachel Cunningham. His father Richard was the president of the First National Bank in St. Paul, and his mother, she was a bit of a local Nepo baby. Rachel's family owned Cunningham and Haas, a large livestock yard company in St. Paul. Lilly showed interest in science at an early age. At 13, he was an avid chemistry hobbyist, like a real-life Dexter. He supplemented his makeshift basement laboratory with chemicals he got from a pharmacist friend. The students in his local Catholic school even called him Einstein Jr. And at the age of 14, he was enrolled into a college prep school for gifted children. While there, he was encouraged by his teachers to pursue science, even allowing him to stay after hours to conduct his experiments in the school's chemistry lab. Lilly spent the 1930s floating from medical school to medical school, rubbing elbows with some of the brightest minds of the time, and some of the wealthiest. This would come to include people like the son of Charles Mayo, the founder of the Mayo Clinic. These two would remain friends until duty called in the form of World War II. For those of you that don't know, the Air Force wasn't their own independent branch of the military until 1947, 3 years after World War II. Up until that point, it was a small Air Corps attached to the US Army. The man, shall we say, had a colorful military career. He conducted research on the psychological effects of high-altitude flying at the University of Pennsylvania. His work focused on extreme elevation flying and the effects it would have on pilots' physical and mental state, even subjecting himself to testing at times. His research helped understand how the human body works, leading to improvements in pilot safety, thus saving many pilots through the war. However, Lilly soon got the opportunity to train as a psychoanalyst, which is a complicated way to say talk therapy based on the subconscious mind's effect on the conscious mind. This helped lead to the development of his isolation tank. And while in the tank, he learned that when a person is deprived of their senses, one could truly understand the nature of the human mind. In the early 1950s, Lilly got the idea that there must be a creature on this earth with equal to or similar intellect to humans. So he combined his psychoanalyst training with the idea of interspecies communication. Lilly believed that dolphins would be the most likely to fit that profile due to their abnormally large brains. He hoped that he could teach a cetacean to make human-like sounds through their blowholes. During the 1950s, Lilly and his first wife Mary would sail the Caribbean looking for dolphins to observe. It was on one of these trips that he came across the marine studios of Miami, the first place to successfully keep bottlenose dolphins in captivity. The dolphins' playful personalities made it nearly impossible to hate these sea puppies. He realized just how smart they were when he watched the friendly flippers quickly pick up new tricks. It was here in the marine studios, Lilly could for the first time study the brains of a living dolphin. He would hook the dolphin's brains up to probes that can measure the neurochemistry. However, dolphins can't be sedated because, well, they just stop breathing. And you can imagine how uncooperative a conscious dolphin would be in the probe sticking out of its head. Yet this part of the experiments didn't last very long for obvious reasons. Despite his controversial methods, John Lilly's research into interspecies communication started to attract eyes and funding from everybody's favorite Nazi-ran movie studio, NASA. The big brains at the space program figured that if we could learn Dolphinese, then we could possibly communicate if we ever make first contact with extraterrestrials. With government funding, Lilly was off to the races to use his new facility. The good part about government funding, the government grade drugs. So Lilly began to test LSD on his bottlenose bubble blowers. Lilly began injecting the dolphins with hallucinogens to see if it could help him communicate. According to his research, dolphins on drugs would tend to be more vocal than their sober counterparts, especially if they were in a tank with a human or another porpoise. Dolphin vocalizations are measured in something called a duty cycle, which is a percentage of time a dolphin is vocalizing per minute. Under normal conditions, aka sober conditions, their duty cycle was between 0 to 70%. However, Lilly discovered that when dolphins are on drugs, its duty cycle would rarely drop to 0, which is a smart lab coat talk pretty much saying when a dolphin is tripping balls, it won't shut up. However, the real success in his hallucinogenic hypothesis would come when Lilly started to work with a rescue dolphin that was injured by humans when it was shot with a spear gun. Lilly found if he pointed a spear gun at the dolphin, it would retreat to the opposite end of the pool. Yet if he dosed that same dolphin with LSD, after around 40 minutes, the drugged subject would let his curiosities take over, swimming over to Lilly whether it had a spear gun or not. He claimed that the dolphin would stay still with one eye out of the water, just staring at the human in front of it. Lilly stated that this was completely new behavior. No shit, Sherlock, you just dosed a dolphin with NASA-grade LSD. This porpoise was on another planet. The dolphin may have not been a pilot, but he was flying. It would stare at the large hairless monkey, trying to find out if it was God or not. Despite his advancements in porpoise PTSD, the LSD experiments didn't do much for his goal of learning Dolphinese. It was, however, around this time a Miss Margaret Lovelet quite literally stumbled onto the lab looking for dolphins. Born in 1942 on St. Paul in the Virgin Islands, Margaret grew up with an infatuation of marine life, with dolphins in particular. Her childhood was filled with the tales of talking animals, with one book specifically influencing her, a Miss Kelly, a story about a cat that communicates with humans. So needless to say, she wanted to change the world into something like a Disney movie. Yet this wasn't going to be the kind of movie she hoped it was. Starting her lab experience with 0 degree and 0 training, she was told a rumor by her brother-in-law about a laboratory on the east side of the island that was working with dolphins. Being young and dumb, she decided to pay the lab a visit, and after a long drive down a muddy road, she pulled up to an unassuming lab at the bottom of a cliff. Driving up to a big white gate, she was met by a tall man smoking a cigarette. His shirt was half unbuttoned, with sweat from the island's sun staining his back. This man was named Greg Bateson, and he was the second in command to John Lilly. When asked why she drove down the long muddy road out to the middle of nowhere, she replied, "I heard you got dolphins. I'd like to come see if you need some help." Not used to visitors, let alone ones with this much bravado, he saw an opportunity for free labor, so despite her lack of degree or training, he invited her inside to meet the animals. This is like if you strolled up to SpaceX, knocked on the door, Elon opens up looking like he'd been on a week-long coke bender. You tell him you really like rockets, so he flicks his cigarette, opens the door, and lets you in and gives you a job. Once inside, Bateson offered Margaret a job observing the dolphins and writing down the behavior that she saw. She may not have known marine biology, but she knew how to use a pen and paper. She turned out to be a good note taker, so Bateson said that she could return to the lab whenever she pleased. And pleased she did, more ways than one. She was in charge of observing 3 dolphins, Peter, Pamela, and Sissy. Sissy was the largest of the group, and she was kind of the bully that ran the show. Pamela, she was the chihuahua of the three amigos. She was very shy and a fearful girl. Then there was Peter, the subject of our video today. He was a teenage dolphin with those raging teenage hormones. You remember those ones that made you push the boundaries and get a little naughty? After Lovelet arrived in 1964, she quickly connected with her three dolphin friends. She was a believer in Lily's work in interspecies communication, so naturally she threw herself into her job, spending as much time as she possibly could during the lab's operational hours. She put the two girls through daily tasks and lessons to encourage them to make human-like sounds. Although the dolphins were in the state-of-the-art facility, there were still limitations to the research. After all, at the end of the workday, everybody packs up, punches the clock, and drives home. Margaret figured that's 10 plus hours a day that the dolphins weren't being taught how to speak, and to Margaret, that's wasted time. Margaret figured that if she could live with the water mammals around the clock, then they would have a better chance of success in their project. So she brought up the idea to Lily and asked if she could fill a portion of the facility with water so she could do a 3-month-long live-in experiment. Intrigued by the idea, he decided to let her start her remodel of the lab. So they got to plastering the walls, sealing and waterproofing the room completely. Building Margaret an elevated sleeping platform so she could sleep dry, they filled the room with 3 feet of water. This would allow both human and dolphin to comfortably live side by side during the duration of the experiment. By the summer of '65, the dolphinarium was ready for use. Lovelet chose the young male Peter to work with because he had no training like the daily lessons that Sissy and Pamela had. Peter was effectively a blank slate, making him the perfect subject for their research. Margaret would do multiple lessons a day with Peter, along with normal conversations she had with him, talking to him almost as if he was a lifelong friend. She would regularly encourage Peter to greet her with a "Hello, Margaret." However, dolphins aren't parrots, so she was getting nowhere real fast. Yet for Lovelet, it wasn't the daily lessons that were most productive. It was just being with Peter that taught her the most about the dolphin. Like how interested he could be in the human anatomy. When Margaret was in the water, Peter would become fascinated with the back of her knee, almost like he was trying to figure out how the bendy bone works. Being that Peter didn't have the company of his lovely ladies, Sissy and Pamela, he would begin getting distracted during his daily lessons, almost as if he had one thing on his mind and one thing alone, that sweet, sweet porpoise poon. With no dolphins in sight, he soon turned his lustful sights towards Margaret. This is the closest thing this project ever got to interspecies communication. Soon, Peter started rubbing himself on Margaret to relieve stress. Yet she caught on to what he was doing, so she would begin to transport him to the tank with the girls. However, due to his frequent distractions, from that itch that just needed scratching, transporting the dolphin soon became a huge problem, so Margaret opted to do the job by hand. After all, she was a dolphin lover. Margaret is quoted saying, "I wasn't uncomfortable with it as long as he wasn't rough. It wasn't sexual on my part, maybe sensual." If I had to read that, I'm obligated to pass that trauma on to you, beautiful bastards. The Dolphinarium wasn't a hotel, it was a research facility. That being said, every single move they made was being recorded. Every single move. It was around this time Lily started losing focus in his work, taking copious amounts of LSD, spending his days in the isolation tank. He began to become more concerned with exploring his own consciousness than learning the dolphinese, officially turning from white lab coat scientist to full-blown drug rug counterculture hippie. The now hippie wanted to go back to his tried and true trusty LSD to test on the dolphins, and that was something Margaret was powerless to stop. It was the 1960s. A woman in her 20s with no scientific degree couldn't tell a NASA-funded LSD dropping scientist what he could and couldn't do with his animals in his facility. She did, however, make him promise to not test on Peter. Yet as much as she hated it, Pamela and Sissy, they were fair game. By the fall of 1960, Lily's interest turned from giving dolphins drugs to giving himself medical-grade trip juice. With the drugs on and in his mind, he completely lost interest in the welfare and care of the animals in the facility. This drove away the lab's director, Greg Bateson, and half the staff. Lily's lack of interest in anything that didn't make you smell colors and see sounds ultimately lost the lab its federal funding. With no money coming in, the entire lab was decommissioned, and just like that, 3-month live-in experiment was over. With the fate of the 3 dolphins up in the air, Margaret's new job was to prepare the shipping and transport to their new home. The dolphins were to be sent to an old bank that had been converted to a research lab located in Miami, a far cry from the open-air aquarium that he had come from. He was now stuck living in a smaller tank with no natural light. After a few weeks of being held captive, Peter's mental state quickly deteriorated during his solitary confinement, until one day Margaret got a call from John Lilly. He called to inform her Peter the dolphin decided to take the long nap, committing the self night-night. Dolphins are mammals, and just like us, they breathe air. However, unlike us, their breathing isn't automatic. Do you feel that? Now you're consciously breathing, choosing when to inhale and exhale. It's called manually breathing. Unlike us humans who have a reflex called automatic breathing, dolphins have to consciously choose when to take their next breath. This keeps them from involuntarily breathing underwater, thus drowning. Life must have become too unbearable for the young dolphin, so he chose to take his last breath, slowly sink to the bottom of his tank, and forever dreaming about his handsy handler Margaret, thus ending the tale of Peter the dolphin and the NASA LSD experiment. If you enjoyed my video on the NASA LSD dolphin, then please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement is a tribute to the algorithm gods, and those gods help put my channel on the map. So, until next time, see you beautiful bastards in the next video.
Yoo-hoo! I'll make you famous.